In my last video, I went through this COM tool, Browse Automation Classes, that allows you to do some exploratory development against COM resources. Now the interesting thing is that's kind of cool. You can go in here and hook up to anything experimentally. But the question you got to ask is, okay, once you've gotten done with hooking up experimentally, how do you do it in code? Well, that's what I wanted to get to today. In this little workspace, I've got the code that is necessary to hook up in a real fashion using the advanced dispatch driver. What you want to do is go to the COM registry interface class, and you can grab every single one of the interfaces just by doing this. And then if you do a detect over it, you can look for specific ones. So if I just do this and inspect it, then I should get a listing of everything that's there. And that's just going to take a moment to come up. And if you look at this, it's going to have every single thing that was in that browser that I brought up the other day. You see all these categories are exactly what I had. So if I want to go through and look specifically for the iTunes one, I do something like this and just do a detect on them. And then I have specifically the one that I want. Now once I've got there, I've got to drive down to the iTunes app. So I'm going to go ahead and iterate down to that and then grab the GUID, which in COM terms is the way I actually grab the interface entry point, if you will. So I'll execute that code. And now I can get a driver by using those. Now these two things here are just constants that are part of the COM library. You can look those definitions up, but they're nothing special. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to inspect the result of this. Now when I do this, you're going to notice something. iTunes is going to fire up and start running, same way it did when I did the equivalent thing using the browser yesterday when I did the other screencast. And the other thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have an inspector pop up. So as you can see, I've got iTunes running here, and in the background behind it I've got the inspector window. This is the same one I had yesterday when I did the other screencast, and you'll notice that it has all the same API points. In particular, it's got things like subscribe to podcast. Now, you'll also notice if you watch the other screencast that I cleaned out my subscription library here. So I can go ahead and do this again. Subscribe to podcast. And I'll give it the URL for our podcast. syncomsmalltalk.com/rss blog/blog_podcast.xml. And I will execute that piece of code. And now you'll notice that coming in here to iTunes, I have something being downloaded immediately, and there it is, and there I have my subscription. So everything's working exactly the same way it did. The difference is I can take this code and I can do something useful with it. Now to show you what I mean, let me go ahead and kill this download. And then once I kill the download, I'm going to go ahead and remove this from iTunes. And once that's out of there, I can go ahead and do something like kill this little window and bring up bottom feeder. Now this is in a development environment, but I've added this functionality to the tool. And if I bring this over to the part of the screen you can see, I've got my podcast subscribed here, and I've got my regular feed subscribed here. So if I select my regular feed, you'll notice I've got an option subscribe in iTunes that's disabled. And if I select my podcast, I can tell it subscribe in iTunes. And again, it tossed that over here to iTunes. So I've taken that exact code I had in the workspace, integrated it into a real application, and then I can subscribe to things in iTunes. So using this code that was in that automation browser is not really terribly difficult, and you can integrate using at least the simple APIs to talk to applications in a very straightforward fashion.